Amy, thank you for speaking with us. I know it's a busy time.
It is indeed. Thanks so much for having me, Andrew.
So, for those maybe not familiar with Her Justice, can you first just tell us a little bit about the mission?
Sure. So, Her Justice is a New York City based not for profit. And our mission is to stand with women living in poverty in New York City by providing them with free legal assistance to address their individual needs as well as systemic legal needs. And we do that in what we call a pro bono first model. So, we recruit and train volunteer attorneys from many law firms in New York City. We often joke that there are more lawyers per capita in New York City than anywhere else in the world.
Right.
At the same time as there are all these folks going through the civil court system who don't have representation. So our mission
Yep.
really is to make that connection. And when we do that, we give more power to our clients, but we're also able to start breaking down systemic barriers that have caused this problem in the first place.
Okay. And that mission is clearly why I think IG has partnered with Her Justice on their current fundraising campaign, which is called Shift the Power. What does that mean, Shift the Power?
So Shift the Power is our tagline, as well as you said, our current fall fundraising campaign. And the reason that's our tagline is it really represents how we pull the power from the private sector to
Mm-hmm.
benefit these women living in poverty who are lacking in power because of historic and systemic imbalances. So, women living in poverty have had power systemically blocked for them,
Mm.
whether it's because there's lack of language access, and 48% of our clients, for example, need an interpreter to access the courts,
Mm.
or whether it's because they don't have access to affordable or available childcare. 70% of our clients are mothers, whether because of historic and systemic racial discrimination,
Mm-hmm.
90% of our clients are women of color. So there are
Right.
all of these systemic reasons why our clients don't have access to the power that they need. And we really feel justice should be equitable. That's a place everybody should be able to go to the courts and be treated the same and have access to the same thing. So when we shift the power of the private sector to our clients, we
Mm-hmm.
feel that they have a better shot at getting the justice that is promised to them by our courts.
Mm. Well, let me just talk a little bit about some of the recent news. I've read that something more than 20,000 migrants maybe have come to New York City over the last few months. What impact has it made on Her Justice?
Yeah, so I mean, in some ways, the short answer is, to be honest, it hasn't had a huge impact because
Yep.
we don't do asylum work. So we do immigration work, we do family, matrimonial, and immigration work. Our immigration work is very narrow. Immigration law is a huge, complex area. So we do the piece that is for people who are already in this country who have a unique opportunity to apply for status while they're here because they've unfortunately been a victim of a crime.
Mm.
It can be any crime. It's often, for our purposes, partner violence or possibly trafficking. So the
Okay.
migrants who are coming to the city right now, by and large, don't fit that category.
Okay.
But their situation is unfortunately very familiar to us because the immigration system, especially over the past several years, is enormously complex, is full of constantly changing rules and requirements, is very prone to subjectivity. So there are
Right.
all of these immigration authorities who make decisions based on enormous amounts of paperwork, and the
Mm.
guidance is not clear or transparent about how those decisions are made. So,
Mm.
we work with immigrants like these folks, like the migrants who are showing up in the city. So we're very familiar with their plight.
Mhm.
And one of the things that will ultimately impact us, because it's going to impact all immigrants in this country, is that the immigration system is incredibly delayed. So
Okay.
we have clients, for example, who are applying for status, and the government will tell them your case looks good on its face. So in other words, we're not going to deport you now. We're reviewing your case, but
Right.
it might take them 3 years to get work authorization.
Amazing.
So what's that old expression about you can't go home, but you can't stay here, right?
Right.
We're not going to make you go home. You can stay here, but you can't work legally and you can't commit a crime, so those are the sorts of things, those incredible delays that are so deleterious to our clients and people like them are going to be, augmented because we've got more and more people coming into our system. So there's
Mm.
kind of a ripple effect, I think, through the system.
Okay. And speaking of ripple effects, the pandemic has had all kinds of, I think, negative consequences. I know for many Her Justice clients. How has Her Justice helped?
So, it's strange, this pandemic process, I sort of feel like it's happened in a couple different phases, if you will.
Okay.
So in the first phase of the pandemic, when none of us knew what was going on, right, in March of 2020, and we all kind of quickly shut down thinking, oh, we'll be back in the office in a couple of weeks.
Right.
What happened then was that we at Her Justice had to pivot like a lot of not-for-profits. So we were able to pivot pretty quickly. A lot of our material was already saved on the cloud. Once it became clear we were not going back to the office in 3 weeks, we issued company laptops to everybody. So we were able to stay fairly functional.
Okay.
What was happening with our clients was that for people who were victims of partner violence, we often lost contact with them during that additional kind of shut down at home period. So that was really scary, right? Because if you're living with someone who's abusive to you, that it's not safe for you to be at home. And now you're really being locked in with that person. Right. So we were very worried about people we lost contact with. So that was something that happened during that period. We also pivoted and did a lot more community outreach using technology at that time. So since folks couldn't leave their homes, and the family court in particular functionally closed at the very beginning of the pandemic, and then opened up only for what it considered to be emergency cases, which it defined very, very narrowly. So did not include most of our cases, did not include child support cases, for example, for a very long period of time. So we were, as people who practice in the courts, to some extent, our hands were tied on that side. So instead, we pivoted to do more community outreach using Facebook Live, using other technological supports to at least provide know your rights and information to communities.
Right.
So that was kind of the first pivot.
Yeah.
I think then there was maybe another phase where people were moving around a little bit more. Victims at home were able to reach out to us, were able to leave their homes. Right. But what's happening now is that the courts have opened up somewhat, but because there was almost a year and a half there where they were really only hearing emergency petitions, there's an enormous backlog. They're not on the front end of technology, so they too are figuring out how to use these various technological solutions. And then there's all the pent-up demand of people who didn't file for a year and a half. So, as I mentioned before, delays. And just to be clear about the harm of delay, it's not just annoying that there's delay, because of course it's annoying. But what delay means is that, first of all, status quo is often kept during delay. Our clients are usually in the status of being, as lawyers, we would say petitioners, or in other words, going to the court and asking for something. So husband isn't paying child support. I go to court to ask the child support be paid. The longer there's a delay, the longer I'm not getting my child support, right? So for our clients, most of that delay means they're not getting access to the rights they're seeking in the court. So I think it's important to explain that, because sometimes delay just feels like, the DMV line we all hate. And this delay has a much more serious day-to-day impact on the lives of people like our clients.
Absolutely. So, Amy, I know I met you a few years ago. I know you're a passionate, New Yorker who loves this city, but I don't think I've ever heard you talk about, what drew you to this organization and this work.
Yeah, absolutely. Passionate New Yorker, love the city, and really love that Her Justice's mission is both to serve women living in poverty in New York City, and that most of our support comes from people who love this city, and understanding that supporting these women is an essential part to kind of being an involved, member of the New York City community. So my background in a little bit of a nutshell, which is hard because I don't think the line has been extremely straight. One of the things I love about Her Justice is that it makes my career make sense in retrospect. So I went to law school late, as some lawyers would say, which means that there were 7 years between college and law school. I was not born wanting to be a lawyer. And I was trying to figure out whether or not to go to law school. And I knew I wanted to do women's rights, and I knew I wanted to do social justice of some kind. I was actually a journalist for a minute, so I've sat somewhat in your seat. And I went to law school when I graduated from law school. That was in 1996. So it had been a time between college and law school. And the Violence Against Women Act passed in 1994. So if you were in law school at that time and you wanted to do women's rights, that was kind of where the action was. And it was a really exciting time. So I got really pulled into doing anti-intimate partner violence work because that was an exciting time to do that work. But I always went into partner violence work with this mindset that I wanted to help women living in poverty. That was the the population I wanted to work with, and the partner violence was kind of the door that I took. So after that, fast forward, I worked at a law firm for a couple of years, and I did a lot of pro bono, and brought a lot of domestic violence organizations to the firm where I worked at Hughes Hubbard and Reed, and they were very generous. And I picked that firm and they picked me because they really did do pro bono for low-income individuals, which was pretty uncommon in the 90s. That was not as common as it is now. The field hadn't grown yet. Okay. And then I worked at a nonprofit institute that lives in Pace Law School, working in the family court, litigating in family court for victims of partner violence. I worked in city government doing policy and setting up one of the first family justice centers in New York City. So kind of organizing a one-stop shop for partner violence. And then I was appointed by then Governor Spitzer to run the state office for the prevention of domestic violence, and was able to set statewide policy on this issue. And what was really great for me about Her Justice, I was familiar with Her Justice because actually in its earlier iteration as In Motion, it was one of the organizations I brought to Hughes Hubbard to work with. So I'd known the organization, respected the organization. Right. And what I really loved about it was that it made all of those other things I had done relevant to this position. So I knew what it was like to be a pro bono attorney, what the great things about it were, what the challenges were. I had worked in government, so I understood about building policy. I had worked in not-profit and the nonprofit sector. And when I spoke to the board at Her Justice, one of the goals they had for the organization was really to grow that policy wing. So I was just incredibly excited to come back to my city, to work in the area that I care about, women living in poverty, and to think about using the almost now 30 years of experience that Her Justice staff and the attorneys with which we work have in the lived experiences of women living in poverty, to put that to some policy briefings and really lean into that systemic change we know we need to make.
Wow. So these issues have been with you for a long time. You've seen a lot. I'm curious if you could wave a magic wand and make, let's just say one change to our legal system, what would it be?
I only have one wand, right? Or one wave.
That's right. One wave, one wand.
Well, yeah.
Don't blow it.
So I think I would say, and this is a big ask, but if I only get one, I'm going to go big. Go big or go home.
Right.
I would say that I would want our system to be truly fair, give truly fair and equitable access to the justice process, and give the support you need to navigate that process. So in other words, whatever door you go through in our justice system, that you would receive the same treatment, the same access to justice, the same support you need to access that justice as anybody else going through any other door.
That would be a powerful change. So hopefully we have some lawyers watching this, and folks just interested in Her Justice. How do they get involved? What's the process?
Yeah, so we're very lucky. I was very lucky when I joined Her Justice. We already had relationships with so many law firms in New York City, and every year we're adding more law firms. So if people listening work for a law firm and you have a pro bono person in your firm, pro bono counsel, pro bono coordinator, first stop is go to them and ask them if the firm already worked with Her Justice, because in many cases they do, and you can find us that way. If you have a pro bono coordinator and you don't work with us, tell them that you wish you did. And we will be happy to come in and do a presentation to the firm, talk to your pro bono coordinator, figure that out. There's also a lot of information on our website, which is herjustice.org. So you can find out the areas in which we work, sign up for updates about we have a regular newsletter to let folks know what kind of cases our volunteers have taken, what policy opportunities are available. So I think those are probably the best ways. And we always, I want to add too that we've historically worked with attorneys, and that is obviously our kind of bread and butter, if you will.
Right.
But one area that we're really growing into is working with other professionals to round out the services we offer clients. So we've historically worked with forensic accountants, for example, because if you're a high net worth person getting a divorce, you would of course have a financial advisor helping you with that.
Right.
But if you're a low net worth individual, you also need financial advice sometimes getting divorced, because you're splitting assets, and they're very few assets, but because of that, those assets are really, really vital. You're also splitting debts. And especially for our clients who have been victims of financial abuse, their partners sometimes are racking up debts they don't even know about. And at the time of divorce, they might be left holding a debt bag that they didn't create.
Right.
So those are places where we're really looking to grow how we partner with other professionals in the city. So I would encourage folks, certainly if you're a lawyer, reach out. That's, the business we're in,
Right.
but also thinking strategically about how to partner with forensic accountants, other financial experts, paralegals. There are all sorts of professionals out there in the community who I think would really love to help. And we're trying to build out that piece of our business.
And helping can bring so much benefit to the volunteers. You've had a lot of conversations with volunteers over the years. I'm just curious, what do they tell you about the experience? What does the experience bring them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I love talking to our volunteer attorneys to ask them just that. Why did you volunteer? What did you get out of it? What can we do better? And I think I would say that by and large, the theme I hear is that the attorneys feel that they become more confident as attorneys. So when you work at a law firm, and I did for 3 years, it takes a while before your first chair, right, in a litigation, for example. These are huge matters with huge teams, and it's really intellectually satisfying, but you're one piece of a very big puzzle that the firm is putting together. When you take a case with Her Justice, you are running that case. So that's equally exciting and intimidating, I think, for the attorneys who take the case.
Right.
The good news is you're running that case with our expertise. So we have attorneys who have among them, some of them have 15, 20 years of experience in the subject matter area. So the volunteers attorneys are incredibly well trained on the substantive area of law. We're with the attorneys every step of the way when they're making strategy decisions, when they're briefing their clients. But as a lawyer, it's really exciting because you have a client that is your client, not the firm. I mean, it is the firm client, but you're doing all the work with the client. You're working with opposing counsel. You may be handling depositions. You're appearing in court. And you really get a kind of confidence from doing that you then bring into your work back to the firm.
Mm-hmm. The relationships that I've heard people talk about when they form with their clients has been really, really inspiring. And this conversation has been inspiring. So I just thought we would, wrap it up with just a sort of a question about, just how you've seen this organization evolve since you've been there. How would you characterize that sort of evolution?
Yeah, well, so I've been here 8 years, which is amazing to realize. Although I don't know if the COVID years count for more than 2 or not. They feel kind of like more than 2.
Right.
And I think what we've been doing is some of what I referenced earlier is that when I was hired, the organization really wanted to lean into policy. And that's something that we've worked hard to do. And we now have an actual policy team. We've issued an original policy report for the first time on child support in particular. That's an issue that's very close to our heart because it's in their child support in New York State is handled in the family courts. Right. So these are the courts I mentioned that are overwhelmed, delayed, did not hear child support cases for a long time during COVID. And for our clients, that's a really essential piece of income. For women living in poverty, child support can represent 40% of their income. So if they have a partner who has the wherewithal to be able to pay that money and they're not paying that money, to not get that income for a year and a half is dramatically harmful. So we've really been digging in on the policy piece on child support to try to think about how could that system work better so that every parent who has an ability to pay pays as quickly as possible so that children get the income they need. Seems like a straightforward policy position, but that's not what we're seeing in the system right now. So I think that's been the biggest change is that really recognizing, that over almost 30 years of representing women living in poverty, those are data points, right? These are human beings, but we actually know an enormous amount about what is working and what isn't working. So how can we convert that into policy papers, into legislation, into advice to our elected officials about how we can change the system overall and make a difference? And you asked earlier, about what some of our volunteer attorneys, what it means for them.
Right.
I think another thing they take away, quite honestly, is they see up close and personal how we have different systems of justice for different people in our society. Family court does not look like federal court in so many ways. And that appropriately outrages them.
Right.
And so we want to channel that outrage into a constructive thing, which is policy change and systems change. And when you work at a law firm, you have the opportunity to see our justice systems work the way they perhaps were designed to work in many cases. That's not necessarily what's happening when you take a pro bono case with us. So we love partnering with the volunteer attorneys to think about, okay, one question I love to ask volunteer attorneys is, what surprised you the most? And they'll tell me things like, everybody was just yelling in family court. Or,
right.
So I don't mean to demonize family court. It's under-resourced. The judges are working with too much. The caseloads are incredible.
Right.
But that results in lesser justice for the people in that system. So I think where we've really seen the change at Her Justice is pulling together all of that knowledge and, again, partnering with our pro bono supporters to turn that into recommendations to try to change the system overall, which will help all the women situated like our clients.
Yeah, well, I can't imagine. I mean, I feel like these volunteers get a civic education that, really most of us don't. So it's quite an opportunity. And it's been such a inspiration to see and hear about your work. So, Amy, thank you again for sharing your thoughts with us and speaking with us. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. I always appreciate the interest, and I'm always happy to talk about Her Justice because I'm so proud of what we're able to accomplish.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.